go. Okay, this is working. All right. Well, it's good to be here this morning. I get to actually be here this morning. It's been a while. Last week I was gone. I was at the Arlington Church preaching, which was great. And this week we're in the week 2 of the Factor series. Pastor Steve last week defined epiphany as any moment of great or sudden revelation, something that changes everything completely. I think we can all pinpoint some moments in our life that we think are those epiphany moments, moments that have changed everything completely. This is the X factor, so to say, a turning point, something that makes all the difference. It's something special, something that really can't be explained or defined in any way. If you watch shows on television like The Voice or American Idol, where people are singing, some performers have that X factor. They have that something special that makes them stand out from everybody else. It can't be defined or explained, but you know it when you see it, right? It's noticed. It makes a difference. And last week, Pastor Steve talked about the fire factor, how fire is often equated with the presence of God. And we see it over and over again in the Bible, and he gave several examples last week of that. And the point being that this fire factor, that we see God use this factor to transform and not to destroy. So when we think of fire, we often think of it destroying things, breaking them down. It comes to ashes, but God uses it to transform and not to destroy. And this week, we continue on, and we're looking at the abundance factor. The abundance factor, when you think of the word abundance, you probably think overflowing, right? Maybe you can visualize a cup with water being poured in, and probably one of my children pouring the water and not paying attention, and then all of a sudden there's water everywhere. Big old mess, right? But abundance, we think overflowing, or more than enough. And the dictionary defines it as extremely plentiful or over-sufficient quantity or supply. Extremely plentiful or over-sufficient quantity or supply. It's more than enough. An abundance is more than enough. It's more than you need, more than you ask, more than you could possibly imagine. Abundance. It makes me think of when Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt and they were in the desert and they started to complain that they didn't have enough food and they didn't have meat. And God said, "You want meat? I'll give you meat." And he gave them quail, and he gave them an abundance of quail, so much that they could hardly move because it was everywhere. That's an abundance. And as we talk about this factor of abundance this morning, I'd like to take a look at John chapter 2. I'll give you a moment to turn there if you want to. And we're going to look at John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. It's most likely that this wedding that they were talking about was for one of Mary's relatives. She seems to have been more than just a guest. She seems to be involved in helping because she knew that they had run out of wine. She knew what was going on, and she was aware of the situation that they were in. Up until this point, Jesus wasn't doing miracles yet. And he had just begun to call the disciples, as we see. And most of the people were unaware of who exactly he was and what he was capable of. To them, he was just another man. But here's Mary, his mother. Mary, who even before his birth was fully aware of who Jesus was and what he was capable of. You know that song, Mary, Did You Know? She knew. She did know. She knew that he was God. She knew that he was divine, and she knew what he was capable of, even before he was born, before other people knew what he was capable of. And still, knowing he was the Messiah and could literally do anything, I find her conversation here with Jesus to be very intriguing. See, she doesn't ask him to do anything. She didn't really make a request of him. She didn't ask a question, even though she knows he's capable of anything. You see, running out of wine was a problem at a wedding feast. The wedding feast probably lasted around a week, and wine was very important, and running out of wine was a problem. It could cause embarrassment, and it could even cause legal action. Yeah. So it was a problem. And instead of worrying or fretting, and I'm sure that most of us couldn't say, yes, when things don't go the way that I plan, I worry and I fret. I'm one of those people. You can ask my husband. He will tell you all sorts of stories, I'm sure. And he's thinking of them right now, I know it. But instead of worrying or fretting or trying to just take care of things on her own, she simply informs Jesus that there's no more wine. She didn't ask him anything. She didn't request, she didn't beg or plead of him. She simply came to him and told him, there is no more wine. They have no more wine. That's all she says. And Jesus responds, woman? But he didn't say it like that. I say it like that because my husband says it to me like that sometimes. But he responds, woman. And understand this, it's in no way negative for him to call his mom woman like this. It was a term of respect and courtesy for him to call her woman in this way, and it didn't have that attitude of woman behind it, okay? I assure you of that. But something important happens in this moment. And if you don't look closely at it, you might not catch it. You might miss it. See, in this one moment here, between Jesus and Mary, in this one moment, Jesus' relationship with Mary changes. He's always lived in submission to his earthly parents. He respected his parents, just as we're called to do. He always lived in submission to them. But in this one moment, his response to her statement to him changes it all. See, it changes in this moment. Why do you involve me? My time has not yet come, is the answer that Jesus gives to Mary. And in this moment, see, he is revealing that submission to his Father, God, takes it all. That the requests by his earthly mother will not come before his obedience to his Father. See, that's what happens in this moment as their relationship changes. His obedience to his Father must come first. And that the time was not yet right. That's what he's saying. The time has not come. It hasn't come. See, he wasn't denying her request. It kind of seems like maybe he was. He wasn't denying that, though. He was not putting her down for suggesting anything to him. But it's a reminder to Mary that he, as God, as fully divine, cannot comply with her wishes if and when they are not in his time. That's what this statement that Jesus makes to Mary is saying. And here is where we see Mary's real understanding of who Jesus is and her confidence in him. She doesn't argue with him or try to reason with him or present anything else to him. She says nothing else to Jesus, actually, but in turn, she tells the servants to simply do whatever it is he says to do. She said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. That's her response. I'm sure it must have been interesting to watch this conversation happening. See, she doesn't even know if or when Jesus will instruct them to do anything. She doesn't. But what she does know is that he is able. And if he wants to, they need to be ready and to obey. See, that's what we see here. He is able, and if he wants to, they need to be ready for that. And here is where Jesus demonstrates his power. For the first time, this miraculous miracle that he does. As we see in the passage, there are 6 large stone water jars that held water for ceremonial washings. That's what this water was for. See, every time they did stuff, they had to cleanse themselves, to make themselves clean. There was a lot of washing that had to be done. You're talking about a lot of guests, a lot of people. And it was important to have the water for those cleanings. And each of these jars we're told held between 20 to 30 gallons of water. Those are big jars. So we're talking probably close to around 150 gallons of water total, somewhere around there. That's a whole lot of water, right? Fill the jars with water is what Jesus said to these servants. Fill them. Fill them full. Now remember, Mary had instructed the servants to do whatever it was Jesus told them to do. And that's what they do. They listened. They listened to Mary and they listened to Jesus. And they filled the jars, it says, to the brim. All the way up to the top. Completely filled with water. And here is where it gets tricky. Here's where their obedience is really tested. Sure, it's easy to fill a jar up with water, right? I mean, that doesn't seem like that strange of a request. Okay, you want me to fill the jar up with water? I'll fill the jar up with water. But here's where their obedience gets tested. Jesus says, now draw out some of the water and take it to the master of the banquet. This is water used for cleansing. This isn't water for drinking. And Jesus just told them to draw it and not only take it out there, but take it to the master of the banquet. Now, why on earth would they want to do something like that? They could lose their jobs. They could lose their lives. It could cause more embarrassment. This is a strange request. But here's the thing. It doesn't say anything about hesitation. It doesn't say anything about the servants exchanging strange looks with each other like, what on earth is he trying to do here? No. I'm not sure how they decided which one of them would be the one to draw the water and take it to the master of the banquet. I wouldn't want to be the one who did it. But here's the thing. They did it. They did it. Just as Mary had told them to do. They did whatever it was that Jesus asked. Whatever it was that Jesus had instructed them to do, they were doing without hesitation, completely obedient. And suddenly the water was wine. And not just any wine, but the best wine. It's hard to say when this transition took place, if it was when they filled the jars with water, is it when they drew the water out, was it when they took the water to the master of the banquet. It's hard to say when exactly this transition from water to wine was made, but this shows Jesus' power. See, he didn't wave his hands magically over the jars. He didn't say any special magical words. He didn't even give any indication that the water would become wine at all. No indication. And yet, he provided in abundance. when he turned the water into wine. This would have been more than what they needed at that time. He provided in abundance. See, abundance changes things. It changes things, especially when it happens in an instant. One moment, there is nothing. They are out completely. It's empty. And the next moment, they have it not just enough, but in abundance. Abundance. You can't do that on your own. It's a fact. You cannot do that on your own. That's what Mary knew here. Mary knew she couldn't do anything. There was nothing that she could do. Her hands were tied. She was helpless. She had nothing to offer for a solution in this moment, but she knew the one who could do something. She knew one who could help. But it's not just a tangible abundance that we're talking here. Yeah, in this moment it was water into wine, and more wine than they could need for this banquet. But abundance that we're talking about, this abundance factor from God, is so much more than just a tangible thing. It's so much deeper than that. I want to turn to Psalms chapter 36 for a minute and take a look. In Psalms in chapter 36, and we're going to start at verse 5. And it says, "Your love, O Lord, reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the skies. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains, your justice like the great deep. O Lord, you preserve both man and beast. How priceless is your unfailing love. Both high and low among men find refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from your river of delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. Continue your love to those who know you, your righteousness to the upright in heart." How many of you started singing along in your head when I started reading those verses? Yeah, we know the songs, right? Your love reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the skies. Bigger, greater, mightier than we can possibly imagine ourselves. Right? See, God is and of himself is abundant. He is so great, and his love for us is so much so that it reaches farther than we could possibly imagine. It's more than we could ever think or hope for or imagine. It's greater beyond anything. When we lived out in Oregon, we lived just outside of Portland, and if you looked in one direction, you could see Mount Rainier most days, and if you looked in another direction, you could see Mount Hood most days, and if you drove an hour to the west, you'd get to the ocean. And it was beautiful, and there were waterfalls that we would go to visit, and God's creation was just so beautiful and breathtaking, and to think how mighty and how great his love is for us when you experience the beauty of his creation, the abundance of what he offers to us. And in Psalms, when they're talking about this, in verse 8, it says, "They feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from your river of delights." Here's something to remember about the people of Israel. See, they were often restricted in resources. Think about Moses again, as I said before, when he led the Israelites out of Egypt. Egypt is not a word. Egypt is, however. Egypt, and towards the promised land, when he led the Israelites out, they before had plenty of resources when they were enslaved by the Egyptians. They had plenty of resources, but when they wandered in the desert, they had nothing. All they had was what they carried with them. And they couldn't just go to the grocery store and buy a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. Right? They couldn't. But God did miracles for them in the desert. And God provided for them. But here's the thing. He provided for them just enough. They got just enough manna to get through the day. And the next day they'd have to go out and get just enough manna to get through that day. They didn't have abundance of resources. They had just enough. They didn't have extra to give. They didn't even really have a place of their own, because they'd stay someplace for a little while, and then God would instruct them to pack up and move again, and that's what they would do. They had to be able to pack up all their possessions in an instant. I could not do that in my house. I have way too much stuff. Maybe it's a reminder that I need to go home and get rid of some things. But I have an abundance of stuff in my house, yes. But they didn't have an abundance. They didn't understand what an abundance was, because they were living on just enough. They weren't thinking about abundance. They just wanted to get through another day. See, but the abundance that God can provide is so much more than merely material things. In fact, it's often not anything physical at all. And it may just not be what we think of or imagine or think that we might need. I like to tell God what I think I need sometimes. And I'm pretty sure that he just laughs at me. We all think we know what we need. We all think that we know what is right for us. And when we pray for things and we're like, God, this is what I need. And God's like, that's not really what I have in mind for you. And he doesn't always answer the way that we want him to. But he always answers. But here's the thing, abundance. We can think, oh, I would like an abundance of money, right? Which isn't going to solve all of your problems. I would like an abundance of this or that. I would like an abundance of coffee. If my coffee cup Katie's shaking her head at me right now. I know you don't like coffee. It's sad. If my coffee cup was never empty, I'd be a happy girl, let me tell you. But we all think, hey, I would like an abundance of this, or I would like an abundance of that. And if I just had never-ending supply, things would be good and life would be easy. And that's just not how it works at all. Seriously, though, here, this passage in Psalm 36, it describes the greatness of God and his power. And verse 8 says, they feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from your river of delights. In our limited mind and understanding, we think of abundance as tangible, physical things. We think of things we can see or feel or touch. But the abundance factor, the abundance of God goes so much deeper and so far beyond just the physical and tangible. It's this abundance that reaches down into the heart of it all, deep down into your soul. And it fills your cup to overflowing in a way you didn't know you needed. In a way that you didn't know was possible. In a way that you didn't know you were missing. See, he fills up spots that we didn't even know were empty to begin with. When he gives us this abundance. When things are hard and he gives us an abundance of strength to get through. When things are rough and he gives us an abundance of people to carry us and to lean on and to support us. 1 Corinthians 2:9 says this. It says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Think about that. Really think about that for a minute. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. The most beautiful things that your eyes have ever laid sight on. The most grand and majestic. It's nothing compared to what God has in store. The most beautiful sound that you've ever heard is nothing compared to what God has in store. anything that you could possibly think of as being the most grandest thing in all the world. The most perfect scenario in your mind is nothing compared to what God has in store. That's his abundance. Greater than we could think, greater than we could hope, greater than we could imagine, far beyond anything that we could desire is what God has in store. More than sufficient. And it creates this moment. See, we talked about epiphany as being an aha moment. Being that instant that changes everything. Nothing will ever be the same again. Never. It's changed. It's different. Those moments in your life that hit you and you have a choice. See, we always have a choice. Yes, it's going to change you. It's going to change your life and your being. And you have no control over that. You will be changed in these moments. But here's the thing. You have a choice. You have a choice. This is where the abundance factor comes in. And this is where God is. See, in that moment, whatever it is, you have a choice. You have a choice on how it changes you. See, it's either going to empty you of everything that you have, and you'll be a shell, empty and broken and hopeless. Or you can let God fill you with abundance to overflowing, and I guarantee you will never be the same again. It brings us back to Mary at the marriage feast here. See, she had a choice. There is no wine. What are we going to do? She had a choice. She could have been defeated by the lack of wine. Oh, man, we ran out of wine. We are done. Everybody's going to be embarrassed. It's going to be this horrible situation. I don't know what to do. She could be defeated. Or she could trust Jesus, who she knew could do something about their situation. He was able, and she knew that. She was so simple and direct with him, and she waits patiently for him and his timing. See, Isaiah 64:4 says, God acts on behalf of those who wait on him. He acts on behalf of those who wait on him. Just like Mary. She didn't worry. She didn't fret. She didn't try to do things on her own. She waited on Jesus. Sometimes in order to receive the abundance, we must wait. We don't like to wait on things, right? We live in a fast food, fast-paced society. If you're hungry, just go through the drive-thru. Get whatever you want. There's lots of different choices. You can have it delivered to your door if you want. Of course, most people don't want to wait that long. That's an inconvenience. You want coffee? There's plenty of places to drive through and get coffee. There could be more, but there are lots, right? We want this. We want it now. You know, we just want everything to be immediately and instantly. You know, people have direct deposit for their paychecks. It just gets directly deposited right into your bank account. You don't even have to go to the bank. We wouldn't want to talk to people, right? Sometimes I think we avoid people. We have so many things that we can do on the computer and stuff that we just avoid face-to-face interactions. And we like things instantly. We want it now. If I decide that I want to do something, I just want to do it now. I don't want to wait for it. But that's the society that we live in, and that's what we get used to. Instant gratification. See, but here's the thing. God does not work in our time frame. No matter how hard we try to make him, God does not work in our time frame. Right? God doesn't work in our limits of things. God works in his timing. Jesus even said that to Mary, my hour has not yet come. He said, I know what you're saying, but I'm saying, God's saying, wait. My hour has not yet come. See, if answers came immediately, there would be no surprise to it, right? Some people like surprises. I know some people do not at all. See, there would be no sudden, unexpected moment if things just came suddenly. But when we wait, when we're willing to wait, that moment comes when we least expect it and when God knows we need it the most. But be careful not to judge. See, we don't always see the abundance in other people's lives. There was no indication in this passage at the wedding that anyone else at the wedding feast had any idea that the wine had run out. There's no indication that anybody else knew anything was going on. You have Jesus, you have Mary, and you have the servants. To them, the other guests at the wedding, to the master of the feast, there was no problem. It just seems that they had waited to the end and they saved the best for last. See, when we are willing to wait and to be obedient, even when it doesn't make sense, then God will provide in abundant ways. God will provide in abundant ways. We will be spiritually filled to overflowing. Our lives will be different, and it will be evident. People may not be able to pinpoint what is different, but they will see it. They will know. And we will experience God in a way we have yet to experience Him before. Something new, something great, something grand. Something that overflows inside of us, and we can't help but to share that with others. Abundance goes beyond what we could hope for or imagine or dream, but it brings us closer to God than we could have otherwise been. It brings us into a deeper relationship with Him, and our lives change. When we say it will never be the same again, it will never be the same again. And that's a good thing. Some of us don't like change, but sometimes change is the best thing that could possibly happen. It brings us to a deeper relationship with Him. Fully, completely, drastically, and forever, our lives change. I read this quote recently, and it said something about, if you were in the exact same place that you were in 10 years as you are now, would you be happy? And most people would say, no, I don't want to be in the exact same spot that I'm in 10 years. Then why are we so afraid to change? Because you can't get someplace else if you don't change. Well, this abundance from God will change you. If we are willing to wait and be obedient, He knows how to meet the real needs of the soul. Not our thought of needs. Not our, well, I think that this is what I need in my life, God, and if you could just provide that in the way that I want and in the time that I want, that would be fantastic, and we can just keep moving on. But that's not how God works. He knows how to meet the real needs of the soul and will abundantly provide and leave no want of the soul unsupplied. He takes care of it all. He provides for it all. He gives us this abundance. See, God wants the best for our lives. He wants to fill with abundance beyond what we can imagine for our souls. That instant, in a moment, life-changing, will never be the same again. But we must be obedient to Him. See, if the servants hadn't been obedient to Jesus, nothing would have happened. Nothing would have changed. There must be obedience. See, sometimes that's where the disconnect comes. We're not willing to do what He's asked us to do, or we don't want to wait for it. But we must be obedient in order to fill that abundance. Let's pray. Father God, You are so great, Lord. You are so awesome and mighty, Lord.